August 1944. The wooden door of the women's barracks at Camp Ruston, Louisiana, rattled beneath a heavy knock that silenced every voice inside. 24 German women froze. Nurses, typists, and auxiliaries from the collapsing fronts in Africa and Italy. For weeks they had been haunted by the same whisper, "The Americans will punish you. They will take what's left of your honor." Now as boots echoed closer, panic surged. Some dropped to their knees, praying. Others pressed against the walls, waiting for the first blow. The door creaked open. Sunlight. The women of the Reich had been told surrender was worse than death. That captivity meant shame. That American soldiers were beasts who would violate and starve them. Those lies had been repeated in newsreels, in leaflets, in whispers from officers who would rather die than be taken. But as the women stood beneath the Louisiana sun, surrounded by guards who averted their eyes instead of leering, those stories began to crumble. The first bite of chocolate was hesitant, then frantic, a taste so sweet it broke something inside them. A nurse named Marta wept openly, unable to believe the enemy's hand had offered mercy instead of pain. In the days that followed, they would learn that the knocks on their doors brought not violence but food, medicine, and awkward smiles, and slowly, between the echo of boots and the rustle of foil wrappers, the daughters of the Reich began to question everything they had ever believed about enemies, power, and the meaning of defeat. The first nights were unbearable. The women slept in rows of wooden bunks that creaked with every breath, each sound amplified by fear. They lay awake listening for boots, for the knock that would mean the end of what little dignity they had left. The air was heavy with the smell of sweat and damp wood, and the silence between them was filled with unspoken prayers. In their minds, captivity was only the pause before humiliation. Their own propaganda had seen to that. For years the Reich had painted the Americans as savages, men who would take vengeance through cruelty and shame. Every story they had ever heard ended in the same way: degradation. So when that first knock came again, even days later, the sound made their stomachs twist. The door opened. 2 guards stepped in, young men with clean uniforms and uncertain faces. They spoke a few words in English none of the women understood, then set down 2 wooden crates on the floor. The metallic pop of lids being pried open filled the air. Inside were cans of meat, loaves of bread, and more of that strange, impossible chocolate. No orders. No punishment. Just food. For a long moment no one moved. Then a woman in the corner, a former nurse named Helga, took one hesitant step forward. The guards stepped back. Their rifles stayed slung. She reached into the crate, lifted a can, and looked to them for permission. One of the guards nodded slightly, his expression unsure but kind. Helga knelt, opened the can with a trembling hand, and began to eat. The others watched, waiting for the cruelty they'd been promised. None came. That night the barrack was silent in a different way. The women huddled together, whispering about what had happened, each one too afraid to admit what she felt. Gratitude was dangerous. It felt like betrayal. Yet beneath the fear, something new was stirring: confusion. Over the following days, the pattern continued. Food arrived regularly, always delivered with distance. When guards entered, they knocked first. When the women washed, the soldiers turned their backs. Blankets were handed out, water brought in buckets, and never once did anyone raise a hand. The shock of kindness became its own kind of torment, because it didn't make sense. Each small gesture carried a weight their minds could not accept. A soldier setting down bread, another adjusting a broken lantern so they could see, a third leaving a bucket of clean water outside the door with a note scrawled in broken German. Trinken. Für euch. Drink. For you. The women had been taught that mercy was weakness, that kindness from an enemy was deception, but the gestures kept coming, quiet and consistent, until the fear began to fray. One afternoon, as the southern sun blazed through the gaps in the wooden walls, a sergeant appeared at the doorway with a translator. He called out softly, asking for anyone with medical experience. 3 women stepped forward, including Helga. They were led across the compound, hearts pounding, expecting the worst. What they found was a small infirmary, neat, organized, bright. A handful of wounded American soldiers lay on cots, some bandaged, others asleep. The sergeant gestured for them to assist. Helga froze. She had not expected this, enemy or not, to be asked to help, not to serve punishment. Her hands moved on instinct, years of training taking over. She cleaned wounds, changed dressings, and listened to men groan softly in pain. When she hesitated, the American medic smiled at her and said the one word she understood perfectly. Danke. It broke something inside her. That evening, she returned to the barracks with trembling hands. The others surrounded her, whispering questions. What had they done? What had he said? Helga only whispered back, "He thanked me." The women didn't know what to do with that. Gratitude was not part of captivity. In the nights that followed, their fear began to transform. It didn't vanish. It shifted into curiosity, into a fragile sense of safety that felt dangerous to trust. When guards came now, the screams no longer erupted. Some women still flinched, but others waited to see what the soldiers carried. Fruit, soap, sometimes newspapers printed in German. Each small act seemed insignificant, yet together they began to dismantle an entire belief system. One night, an older woman named Frida found herself staring at the guard standing watch beyond the barbed wire. The man was humming softly, his rifle resting by his side. "He looks tired," she murmured. Another woman laughed bitterly. "He is an American. They don't tire." But Frida didn't respond. She only watched him, this boy no older than her own son, and realized that he was human. That realization spread like a quiet infection among them. They began to see their captors less as monsters, more as men, awkward, homesick, sometimes kind. The first laughter came days later. A guard tripped while trying to teach them the English word for breakfast, landing flat on his back in the dirt. The sound startled the women, then burst into giggles that they couldn't contain. The guard, red-faced, laughed with them. It was brief, awkward, and strange, but it was laughter. In a place built for fear, it was rebellion in its purest form. Still, the guilt came after. Each time they smiled, they remembered the ruins of Germany, the faces of those who would never understand. If they knew we laughed with Americans, the thought lingered like a shadow, but the human spirit adapts even when forbidden to. By September, the barracks no longer echoed with screams at night. Women folded their clothes neatly, swept the floors, tended to small gardens they were allowed to keep behind the wire. A few of the guards brought seeds and tools, explaining with gestures how to plant them. The sight of green shoots pushing through dry soil felt like a miracle. Frida wrote in her diary, "We thought they would strip us of everything. Instead, they gave us life we had forgotten. The most haunting moments were not the grand ones, they were quiet, almost invisible. The smell of coffee drifting from the guardhouse, the hum of electricity in the lights that never flickered, the sound of boots passing without fear. These were the things that undid them, slowly, completely, because cruelty can be resisted. But mercy demands you see the other side as human. And for the women of Camp Rustin, that was the hardest truth of all. The heat of September pressed down like a heavy blanket. Each day began with the clang of the mess bell and the low murmur of boots outside the wire. By now, the women no longer jolted awake at the sound. Habit had dulled the edge of fear. Yet still, every knock carried the faint echo of that first day, the sound that once froze them in terror. Morning light crept through the slats of the barrack walls, painting stripes of gold across the wooden floor. The air smelled of soap and dust mingled with something new. Coffee. Real coffee, not the bitter substitutes they had known back home. The scent drifted from the small canteen where American cooks worked behind a screen of canvas. Inside the barracks, the women prepared for roll call. Marta adjusted her collar, smoothing the wrinkles from her uniform. Once crisp gray, now faded to a pale ghost of its old self. Helga helped braid the hair of a younger girl who had arrived only a week earlier. They didn't speak much. Words still felt fragile, like glass that could break at the wrong touch. The door opened. A guard stepped in, one of the quiet ones with sunburned skin and a Kansas drawl. He said something in English, then added a few halting German words. Frühstück, breakfast. He smiled awkwardly and motioned for them to follow. Outside, tables were set up in the yard, simple wooden boards on metal frames. On them sat bowls of porridge, bread still warm from the camp bakery, and slices of fruit that glowed in the morning light. The women stood motionless, uncertain. They had imagined America as a land of conquerors. They hadn't imagined this. One of the guards noticed their hesitation and, without a word, took a spoonful himself. He ate, nodded, then stepped back, leaving the space open. Only then did they approach. Helga tasted the porridge first. It was sweet, soft, ordinary. That was what made it extraordinary. Her throat closed. She set the spoon down, pressing a hand to her face. "It tastes like before the war," she whispered. The guard heard her tone, not her words. He looked away, embarrassed, pretending to adjust his sleeve. Later that morning, while scrubbing clothes by the water pump, Marta watched an American soldier carry a crate of milk bottles toward the mess hall. Each bottle gleamed white in the sun, the glass so clean it sparkled. He stumbled slightly and one bottle slipped, shattering on the ground. Milk spread across the dirt in a pale river. The man laughed softly, muttered something, and fetched another crate. Marta stood frozen. In Germany, a spill like that would have been cause for punishment or tears. Here, it was an inconvenience, a luxury so great it bordered on sin. That night she wrote in her diary, "They waste what we beg for, and yet I cannot hate them for it." Days passed in that strange rhythm. The guards remained distant but kind. They knocked before entering, spoke softly, and brought supplies from time to time: soap, brushes, even fabric for mending clothes. Some of the women volunteered for work outside the camp, in fields, in kitchens, even at nearby hospitals. The fear of violation, once a living thing inside their chests, began to lose its grip. Helga was assigned to the infirmary. She expected to find only prisoners there, but to her shock she saw American soldiers, some wounded, some sick, lying on cots beside German men. An American medic handed her a tray of gauze and ointment. "You nurse?" he asked. She nodded. He gestured to a wounded prisoner, saying simply, "Help." And so she did. Hour after hour, she cleaned wounds, changed bandages, and watched as the medic treated each patient the same, enemy or ally. No lectures, no cruelty, just care. When her shift ended, the medic offered her an orange. She refused at first. He pressed it gently into her palm and said, "Vitamin C. You need." It was the first time anyone had handed her a gift since capture. She stared at the fruit for a long time before she peeled it. The scent made her dizzy. That night she shared slices with the women in her barracks. They ate slowly, savoring each drop of sweetness as though it were sacred. It wasn't just the food that changed them. It was the rhythm of dignity, the way the guards never entered without warning, the way they stood aside when the women bathed, the way they apologized if they raised their voices too loudly. Each small gesture chipped away at what the women had been taught. Frida, the oldest among them, said it first. "They treat us like we are made of glass," she murmured. "No," Helga replied. "They treat us like people." The line hung in the air. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, quietly, one of the younger girls began to cry. By mid-September, the camp no longer felt like a cage. It felt like an education. They learned English words and water. Thank you was good night. They repeated them under their breath, testing their sounds. Guards sometimes joined in, laughing when they stumbled over German in return. The laughter, awkward and fragile, became its own kind of peace treaty. By late winter, the barbed wire no longer looked sharp. Frost clung to it like lace, softening its menace. Beyond it, the pine trees stood still beneath a silver sky, and the camp seemed almost peaceful. The war outside was collapsing, though no one inside knew exactly when or how it would end. The women no longer jumped at footsteps or knocks. They folded laundry, wrote letters, helped the cooks, and waited. For news, for orders, for something to remind them that the world was still changing. Helga often sat by the fence in the evenings, sketching small shapes in the dirt with a stick. "Do you think they'll let us go?" Marta asked her one night. "Eventually," Helga said, eyes on the horizon. "But I don't think we'll ever leave this behind." When news of Germany's surrender finally reached Camp Ruston, it didn't come as a trumpet call, just a line in a newspaper left on the mess hall table. "Germany surrenders. War ends in Europe." No one cheered. No one wept. The words carried the weight of a world that no longer existed. That evening, Captain Ellis, the camp commander, addressed the women through a translator. "The war is over," he said simply. "You will soon return home. Until then, you remain under our protection." Protection. The word echoed strangely. It was the opposite of what they had expected to hear from an enemy. The next morning, the guards brought extra rations: bread, meat, even butter. One soldier left a crate of apples by the gate with a handwritten note. Good luck. The women stared at the words as if they were written in another language. For months they had been fed, clothed, and guarded by men they were taught to despise, and now those same men were wishing them well. Helga found herself trembling as she bit into the apple. It was sweet, almost too sweet, like a memory that refused to fade. In the following weeks, preparations for departure began. Medical officers checked the prisoners' health, forms were signed, and ships were readied. The women cleaned their barracks, folded their blankets, and packed the few belongings they had been given. A comb, a notebook, a bar of soap, a letter or two. Some of the guards came to say goodbye. They stood awkwardly by the gate, hats in hand. One offered cigarettes. Another handed out photographs of his family. Keepsakes, he said. So you remember we were human too. Helga took the photo and looked at it. A smiling woman with 2 small children, a garden behind them. She nodded but couldn't speak. Later she wrote in her diary, "They treated us like people when we did not deserve to be treated as such. It confuses me still. I thought victory was power. Now I think it might be grace." The day of departure came quietly. Trucks rolled into the yard at dawn, engines humming against the chill. The women lined up, their breath visible in the cold air. Some carried Red Cross letters tucked close to their hearts. Others clutched small gifts from the guards, a pencil, a folded handkerchief, a bar of American soap wrapped in brown paper. Before stepping into the trucks, Frida turned back toward the barracks. The door stood slightly open, light spilling across the floorboards. "We screamed when they knocked," she whispered, "and cried when they brought us food. I wonder what they thought of us." No one answered. The trucks moved slowly down the dirt road toward the railway line. The guards saluted as they passed, some with genuine sorrow in their eyes. The women waved back, hesitant, grateful, and afraid all at once. At the train station, an American officer handed each of them a small envelope containing a document of release and $5 in occupation currency. "So you can buy what you need when you reach home," he said through the interpreter. Home. The word felt foreign now. As the train began its long journey east, the women stared through the windows at the endless stretch of American farmland. The world outside was alive, factories working, children cycling down dirt roads, towns still glowing at night. It was not the America they had been shown in propaganda films. It was real, and it was gentle in its strength. One young woman, Greta, whispered, "I used to think their power came from machines. Now I know it comes from something else." Helga nodded. "From mercy," she said softly. "And mercy frightens us because it shows how small hate really is." Weeks later, when they finally reached the ruins of Germany, the shock was unbearable. The ports lay in ash, the cities in silence. Bombed skeletons of buildings reached toward the gray sky like the bones of the dead. Families scavenged for food. Children wandered barefoot through rubble. The women stepped from the ships and saw the contrast, not just between defeat and victory, but between worlds. They had left a land of light and returned to one of shadows. At the refugee centers, officials took their names and records. Some were reunited with family. Others were told there was no one left to claim them. They tried to describe what they had seen, the food, the lights, the kindness, but the words fell flat. No one believed them. How could they? "Americans do not behave like that," said one man bitterly. Helga only shook her head. "No," she whispered. "They behave better." In the months that followed, the women scattered, some to rebuild their homes, others to search for lost relatives. But they carried the memory of the camp within them like a secret too strange to confess. For years they spoke of it only in diaries or to their children in hushed tones. One of those children would lay, "The guns fell silent long ago, but mercy still echoes louder than war." For the women who once trembled at every knock, captivity became the classroom where they learned what true power looks like. Not domination, but decency. In a world that has too often measured victory by destruction, their story reminds us that restraint can be the highest form of strength, because sometimes the hardest act in war is to be human. If you believe stories like this should never be forgotten, subscribe and help us keep history alive.